Remember when writing research papers meant taking a trip to the nearest library? Not anymore. In today's high-tech world, it is easy to gather information for a research paper if you have access to the internet. But with the vast amount of resources and information available online, it is more important than ever to educate kids about the dangers of plagiarism. First, take a look at this passage and see if you can identify what is and isn't plagiarism. Click Next when you're finished to continue with the lesson. Only the second answer is not plagiarism, because it's considered common knowledge. Some kids may not have a good handle on what is and is not common knowledge. It's important to help them understand that common knowledge is information that can be found in a number of places and is known by lots of people. For instance, facts in history, such as George Washington was the first president of the United States, are considered common knowledge. But what about the other answers? Why are they all considered plagiarism? In order to help kids avoid plagiarism, you can teach them to be very careful about what and how they borrow from other sources. Here are the reasons why the other answers are considered plagiarizing. Some kids may think it's plagiarism only when they copy text. They need to understand that plagiarism is not only limited to other people's written words. This list gives some other things that can't be reused without giving credit. It might be a good idea to share this list with kids who are preparing to write a research paper. A lot of kids don't realize how serious plagiarism is. Are you even aware of its severity? Answer this question and click Next to learn more. Many kids don't think plagiarism is a big deal. They may look at research as busy work and don't necessarily see the value in it. Kids should know that the skills they learn from writing papers, researching, and analyzing information are valuable skills to have. Parents and teachers should also stress that plagiarism can be considered a crime and can have these possible consequences. Procrastination can be a huge factor in plagiarism. With all of their outside activities and other interests, many kids wait until the last minute to write a paper. It can make them feel overwhelmed and rushed, which can cause them to take careless notes and to plagiarize even if they don't mean to. They can also feel pressure from parents and teachers to make good grades. Unintentional plagiarism often occurs when students forget they've copied a phrase or when they fail to note a source in their work. You can help encourage good research habits by encouraging and teaching kids the skills listed here. Crediting a source is one of the most important things to teach kids to avoid plagiarism. Basically, when they credit or cite a source, they are recognizing the source of the information. Many kids will hesitate to use too many citations in their papers for fear that they won't seem original. It's important to stress that the more they can back up their thoughts with good sources, the more valid their points will be. So, we have discussed citing references and what students should include. But we also need to discuss what needs to be cited and what doesn't. Try answering this question. Then click Next after you have checked your answers. If you selected all of the sources, you were correct. Including a citation for any and all sources is very important. It does not matter if the source is an expert, a published author, or a neighbor whose opinion is included. Citing sources is the key to avoiding plagiarism. Now that you've taught kids how important citing their sources is, it is just as important to teach them how to properly include the citation within the paper. One of the most popular ways is to include the author's name and the page number where the information appears in parentheses, and to place it right after the information being cited. Here's an example of how it should appear in their document. All of the other information that they wrote down in their notes, publisher, title, publication date, etc., will go on either a footnotes or endnotes page, or in a bibliography. These provide a complete listing of all the sources used to write their paper. Each teacher may prefer and request a specific type of source list. But what about information that they get from the internet? These sources change quite often, so it is important to stress the need to include as much information as possible to direct the reader to the proper source. Here is an example of what an internet citation might look like. It is important to note, though, that the formatting will depend on the style that each teacher wants the student to use. Let's see how well you can recognize proper citations within a paper. Take a look at this question, and then, when you are finished, click Next to learn more. Just as there are different ways to list citations, there are also many different style guides for citations. Each teacher should request a particular style guide when they assign a paper. This style guide will dictate things like spacing, font, format of the citations, and location of the references. Another thing that kids need to be careful of is how to paraphrase. It is important to teach them that simply changing a few words here and there is just not enough. And just because they put the idea into their own words does not mean they don't need to cite the source. Stress to them that if the idea wasn't theirs, they shouldn't take credit for it. Here's an easy way to teach kids how to paraphrase. Tell them to read the material they want to include in their paper. Then, without looking at the text, write the ideas down in their own words. Tell them to be careful to check what they have written against the original to be sure they have not accidentally used the same phrases, or that they have not changed the meaning of what they are trying to say. Let's see if you can identify a good example of proper paraphrasing. This may help you to share good versus bad paraphrasing with your kids. Click Next when you are ready to continue. Some teachers submit student papers to sites such as Turnitin, which compare a paper to databases of other papers to see if it might have been plagiarized. These tools check the work for originality and make sure sources are credited correctly. Many teachers require that students submit their papers to sites like WriteCheck, Turnitin's version for students, before they hand it in. This is a great way to avoid those unintentional slip-ups. The best way to help kids avoid falling into the trap of plagiarism is to teach them everything you can about it. Don't stop at how serious it can be. That's like handing them the keys to the car and telling them to be careful out there, even though they don't know how to drive. The best way to teach kids to not plagiarize is to educate them about what plagiarism is, as well as the best ways to avoid it. Planning, proper note-taking, and citing in their writing. Here are some real-life examples of how the concepts discussed in this lesson could be used in a classroom, either as a teaching tool or an administrative aid.